Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our broadcast. I'm Sarah Vaezi, Chief Digital Strategy Officer with the Providence Digital Innovation Group. As a reminder, the information provided during the event today is for information purposes only. If you have any medical questions, please reach out to your primary care or healthcare professional. Now let's begin. Joining me today for this event is Aaron Martin, Executive Vice President and Chief Digital Officer for Providence, and he's also the Managing General Partner for Providence Ventures. And Aaron and I today will be talking a little bit about innovation at scale. Thanks for joining, Aaron. Could you start by telling us a little bit about your role within Providence, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I have three parts to my role. I run the marketing organization, so that includes everything from, kind of owning and managing the brand to inbound and outbound marketing. Digital, which has kind of two components to it. One is an operational component, which is managing anything and leading anything that is consumer or patient facing. So any of our websites or apps, anything that the consumer or the patient interacts with. And then also within the digital component is an incubator. And the third component is what you lead, which is digital strategy. And we'll talk a little bit more about how those things kind of work together. And then last, but certainly not least, is Providence Ventures. It's a $300 million fund with 22 portfolio companies within it.
Awesome. So for folks who don't know as much about the Digital Innovation Group, could you talk, you mentioned a little bit, they have there's different components. There's sort of the operational components, there's the incubation components. Could you tell us a little bit more about, just describe DIG a bit more and give us a little bit about the origin story? How did it begin? How did you come to join Providence? A little bit about that. I know it's been seven years.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can remember all of it. So prior to Providence, I was at Amazon for 9 years, and prior to that, I founded two companies, one in banking and financial services software, and the other one in manufacturing software. So, and then prior to that, I was in healthcare. So I guess I'm kind of back in both healthcare and tech. I was working at Amazon, having a blast, doing my thing, and one day I got a call from a headhunter who would usually pitch me about some position at Facebook or Google or some other big tech company, and I would politely pass. This time he said, "Look, Aaron, I've got a really out of left field opportunity. I'm going to say a couple of words. Don't hang up. Nonprofit healthcare. Are you still there?" And it was such an odd kind of right turn from kind of where my career was kind of headed, because I was working then in Kindle and working on a special project for Jeff. And then prior to that, worked in North American Books. That I just, honestly, I had to kind of check it out. And one of the things that the recruiter said is, you've got to meet these two guys, Rod Hochman and Mike Butler. They're really, really kind of, big thinking, healthcare executives who are thinking about disruption and thinking about how healthcare should be. And you've got to remember that this was 7 years ago. And so we were in the midst of kind of, the rollout of the ACA. There was a lot of other stuff other than digital going on. And what really impressed me is, in my initial conversations with Rod and Mike were, that they were kind of seeing several horizons, down the path. At that point, believe me, healthcare was not even a twinkle in anybody's eye at Amazon. As a matter of fact, I spent, a good hour explaining to my boss at Amazon why I was going to go work for a health system. He was kind of checking me for sanity at some level. He was, like, do they have digital? And I'm like, no, that's the thing I'm going to fix, and that kind of thing. And so kind of joined the team. And my original kind of duties were pretty kind of broad and undefined, and pretty quickly, based on my conversations with Rod and the senior management team, and with other kind of folks in the industry, the big issue that, Providence and other health systems had to confront was digital disruption and how to get ready for it. And so that's kind of the major focus. And so we kind of put several different kind of tools in place. One is the venture fund that I mentioned before. The other is a very nascent version of the digital team. Not too further after that, I hired you, so that was like hugely helpful. And then later on, about three years later, also had marketing report into me. So that's kind of the origin story and how it all got started.
So a lot of what you described, you're sitting at the sort of the nexus of consumer, technology, and healthcare, and those are those are not always seen together. I mean, it's more common now than it was certainly 7 years ago, as you noted. How do you really see those coming together specifically? And like, how does DIG actually meaningfully address those different pieces? And how does that like connect to an overall DIG vision?
Yeah, I think the key parts, the reason why marketing, digital from both an operations and an incubation standpoint, and the venture fund all kind of roll up into one single exec is you need the ability to have a really clear understanding of what's going on in the innovation marketplace. So that's kind of the role that Prov Ventures plays, right? So one of the things that Rod always talks about is being at a conference with a bunch of other CEOs. There was apparently some consultant up there showing a very complicated, map of the digital landscape, and this was a few years ago. I'm sure it's 10 times worse today. And literally seeing kind of beads of sweat rolling down the down the temples of his kind of colleagues, and him thinking to himself, "I got this set because I've got a team that really kind of engages closely with these innovators and can kind of really understand, the difference between what's real and what's helpful and those types of things." So, Sarah, your team, the ventures team, kind of play that role in terms of kind of being a really good, a screen for, things that what we call will be needle movers, right? So I think that's the first kind of component of it. Marketing really matters because it's all about the communication of the value proposition to our patients and our consumers. And so, we're kind of at the intersection of innovation and compassion in our organization, kind of the two lenses of, across which we kind of look, at the problem that we're trying to solve. And so the marketing and the brand piece and the ability to kind of reach out to, patients and consumers in a scalable way really matters to this mission. And then the question is, how do you, once you bring them into our ecosystem, how do you engage with them, right? So the first is you got to be able to digitally transact with them. And the thing I always kind of talk about is it's not good enough to simply have, for instance, a video visit, right, that you scheduled, by telephone. You've got to have an end-to-end digital experience that feels great. It feels modern, and it's pretty close to everything else you use outside of healthcare in other contexts. And because that is what's coming from kind of digital disruptors, it's here, right? And so, health systems to be kind of competitive and relevant have to have similar digital experiences. And then once you've kind of transacted, you've also got to engage with the patient between episodes of care. We've got a huge problem in healthcare, just from a structural kind of business model standpoint is, fortunately for us and for the US population, most people are healthy. And so we see most of our patients 2.5 times a year, right? So how do you change the relationship between us and our customers, our patients, from kind of an episodic, sick care model to really delivering health on a continuous basis, encouraging them to kind of engage in healthier behaviors, which also helps with, population health, et cetera. And so then finally, fundamentally, I view what my job is to move our relationships with patients from a predominantly offline sick care model to a highly online, continuously engaged model around your health. And I think that is a much bigger kind of opportunity for any health system, much less Providence.
Awesome. I think that's, hugely transformational for the industry. And I always quote you, Aaron, when you remind me that as incumbents, our role is to really consider what's going to kill us first and tackle that, right? And digital is a really key means by which we can do that. So that's kind of like the what we're doing. Can you go back and tell us a little bit more about how, and tell us about the innovation model? It's really unique, and in particular, it takes into account some of the nuances associated with building technology in the context of a not-for-profit healthcare system. So could you tell us a little bit more about the innovation model and how the pieces of the puzzle come together?
Yeah, and it's kind of weird that you're asking me this question because you kind of authored it, but you tell me what I got wrong. But for everybody out there, the person, one of my key hires was Sarah, early on into the process, and what she did is kind of create order from chaos. And what was happening before is, and this, I think most health systems go through these different stages. And stage one is very kind of random. Digital offerings being kind of, piloted at maybe the clinic level or even the physician level, and really no strategy attached to it and no way of scaling it. And so the work that Sarah and I did when she first came on board, I guess it was in year 2 or year 3, was to really think through, okay, we got several different problems that we've got to solve. One is we've got to scale digital across, a very big, complex organization. We've got to basically figure out a way of prioritizing what matters and what will actually add economic or clinical value or customer experience value across the health system. And then, the third piece is we're also going to be, for effectively competing or trying to stay relevant relative to much, much better resourced organizations that can afford, because of their margin structure, to spend a ton of money on technology. So how do we kind of, punch above our own weight? And so those are kind of the 3 requirements. And the thing that, Sarah and I kind of, worked on and came up with was basically, step 1 is Sarah's team goes out and talks to every year hundreds of people, not only within our health system, but across our industry, does a ton of research and really tries to understand, what are the big kind of needle moving problems or opportunities health systems, face. So that's kind of the first step. The second step is to work with our clinical and our operations colleagues and prioritize it, because if it's not important to them, it's not going to happen, and it's probably not important to the health system, and it's usually not important to our patients and our caregivers. So we try to actually put an economic value or a clinical value on that opportunity. And by default, when you do that, you're also kind of sizing the market, because if we're kind of a $26 billion health system and we represent, 5% of the entire kind of provider base, you can just extrapolate what that value is for the market of the opportunity, if you go fix it. And then the next step is we just, try to figure out where we're going to get the technology to go solve the problem. Step 1, look in your own, in your own house. So make sure that, we don't already have a solution to the problem. We have, we're really, really fortunate to kind of be working with some really, really great, technology partners like, Epic and Microsoft and, our portfolio companies and Providence Ventures. So first check there. Do you already have the solution? I can't tell you how many times when I first came on board, I would find 2 solutions solving the same problem across the health system. So rationalizing, the portfolio of applications really, really matters from a cost standpoint. Then the second step, if we don't have it, then we try to go find it out in the market. And so that's really where Sarah's team and Providence Ventures really starts to kind of take effect. It's going out and looking at the market and trying to find what we call best of breed. And so these are companies where, we'll usually see probably 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of them. And possibly we may pilot 2 of them within our own health system to test the results. And then based on that, we'll create a commercial relationship, and then we may or may not invest in those companies. if we do invest in those companies, it's great. We are very fortunate. Of the 22 active portfolio companies we've got, 4 of them now are valued over $1 billion. One of them is quickly heading in that direction. And all the other companies are doing extremely well. And so it kind of goes to the point of, like, if you start off with a fundamentally large problem and you test it internally, guess what? You're usually going to find a big market opportunity that these technology companies are going after. And you've usually found the best one if you've kind of field tested it. Of the 22 portfolio companies that Providence Ventures has, all 22 of them have commercial agreements with our health system. So if you don't have it and you can't find it, then is the last piece, which is at the very last resort, we'll build it. And so we have 120 or so very, very talented people who come from places like I do, like Amazon and Microsoft and various technology organizations. And what they do is in addition to the kind of operational role that they have of maintaining and building the websites and the apps, et cetera, they also build new technologies for the purposes of spinning them out as new companies. We've done that twice before. I was actually just at the board meeting of Zelf, which is our first spin out. We sold a product to a company called Wildflower. We sold Circle to them, and as our next spin out. And then we're actually, as we speak, working on our third spin out called DexCare, which is an e-commerce platform for healthcare. And so we've done that, knock wood, closing on 3 times, and really kind of proven out the model. But the key thing there is build in the blank space. Don't build, technology just because you can. One of the things I am a big believer in is the reason why we always try to find best of breed first is it's incredibly hard to catch up once somebody's got kind of market momentum, and especially in healthcare because the sales cycles are so long and brutal. So that's kind of our model. And when we build something to spin it out, we go through a very, very kind of diligent, set of, phase gates of first, create the product, make sure it works and it delivers value. Second, go sell it to another health system because, it's a good test that we don't fall in love with our own cooking. Does somebody else really other than us have the same problem, right? If it passes that stage gate, then we go hire a management team. That's actually one of the biggest ones. If you can get a very, very experienced management team interested, there's probably something there. They're signing up for a 5 to 7 year commitment, most probably minimum. And so that's a big chunk out of somebody's kind of, life, and they have to be, really excited about the opportunity. And then last but not least, even though that Providence Ventures does fund companies, and does lead investments in companies, we typically look for an external lead to set a price on the value of the equity and to make sure, again, that we're not, putting a price on something we created ourselves.
Aaron, you talked
How'd I do?
That was awesome. I did want to drill in a little bit more on one area, which is, these are, like you said, big problem spaces. We're very deliberate about the strategy and the kind of process we go through to determine if we're actually going to build something. And clearly, these are like the most important things that we think we need to put our resources against. But then tell us a little bit more about, like, why spin it out then? Why not just keep it?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think this goes to that requirement that, you and I came up with early on, which is how do you kind of punch above your own weight and how do you get resource leverage? So, like, for instance, if we took the Zelf example, for instance, when we first, kind of came up with the idea internally, we had, 4 EIRs working on the problem, and the problem they're solving, just, for background, is the ability to prescribe anything that's not a pharmaceutical as if it were a pharmaceutical directly from the EMR. So physicians now in our health system have the ability to prescribe content, apps, you name it, directly from the EMR as if they're prescribing a drug. And that shows up in our app as a prescription that your physician has sent to you. Watch this video, download this app, that kind of thing. And what the problem it was trying to solve is we were really kind of dealing with, low levels of digital adoption. And we just, thought about like, what is the most well-worn path in which technology in healthcare gets adopted? Well, it's from the physician's pen. So if you think about pharmaceuticals, medical device, that's how they get recommended and how patients end up using it. So that's basically what we kind of built there. When it was internal to us, it was 4 people, right? And now I just got out of the board meeting. They're kind of around 75 folks. They have 10 health systems on their platform. They've raised close to $26 million. They raised around from Cerner, and so the benefit is that we can leverage not just our funding, but other health systems as customers, as well as other investors, to kind of co-fund and develop this technology for the betterment of the industry. And the technology gets spread and those types of things. And so it avoids if I internally had to kind of use our budget just to fund that one project, that would have consumed probably 2/3 of, almost, 75% of our current staffing. And we don't have an unlimited budget at Providence. We're, relatively leanly staffed compared to big tech companies or the same. And so this is around kind of resource leverage, and then also making sure that the roadmap continues to be kind of prosecuted, because what would happen if it was only internal is we'd probably grow the team up to say 10 or whatever, and then priorities would shift, and something else would become more important, and we would never get down the path.
Aaron, I think we have a question from social, specifically related maybe to Zelf, but also just more generally, how do we engage with providers in this model? And in the context of Zelf, like how do providers get engaged to help them utilize this technology and other new technologies that we incubate?
Yeah, I mean, I think a good example is if you take Zelf plus our Wildflower platform, which the product name for us is Circle. Circle is a women's health platform. So it basically helps, women who are expecting, who are pregnant, while they're pregnant, and then kind of postpartum, call it, pediatrics, 3+ years. And what it does is it guides them through the pregnancy and through kind of the early years of their child. And it's super helpful, right? Initially, how we did this is we had physicians prescribing Circle as a one-off thing, right? And we had pretty high adoption. I think we were, prescribing tens of thousands of these apps through Zelf, where physicians are, saying, this woman's come into my office and I want to help her, kind of manage her care at home. It helps kind of answer her questions so that, it kind of takes time. It makes the visits more focused. So all her basic questions are answered before she kind of comes in for her next visit. So there was a clear value proposition to these physicians. And we co-developed this platform with our clinical program services group, in the women's health group. And they were the domain experts. And all we did was we kind of, wrote down and understood what they're trying to achieve and kind of translated it into app form and to content, right? And so they had the care model, they had all the great ideas, and all we did was kind of translate that into technology. So it's a good example of how we partner with the clinical leadership.
Yeah.
And then what ended up happening was, or what's happened now is, the prescription of this is so routine that now we're going to turn it more into an algorithmic approach where, once a woman has gotten to her kind of second visit in the physician's office, it will automatically be prescribed if she's pregnant. And it's kind of like, making sure so the summary is built by clinicians for clinicians, experiment at small scale. And then once everybody's got, the confidence that this will work at bigger scale, and you've gotten all the feedback and kind of sanded off the rough edges, if you will, then you can kind of scale it to more of an automated approach.
That's awesome. And it's actually a perfect segue kind of into my next question, which is, and I've heard both you and Rod talk about how when you bring healthcare folks and technology folks together, that's kind of when the magic happens. Can you talk a little bit more about that magic and, like, how did you've built a really unique team. How does having a team from these different backgrounds, and in particular from a technology background, help to both build interesting new technology, innovate, and then bring it to scale within the organization?
Yeah, I think, the circle example is a wonderful example that I just went through of, like, you put clinicians and product folks and engineers all in the same room, and you come up with something magical like Circle, which really, really helps women kind of navigate through their, their pregnancy. I mean, same thing with Zelf. I mean, we kind of co-collaborated with that, with the clinical teams and with our operations teams. Another great example is how we worked with, the ambulatory care network, the group that runs the express care clinics to build Dex Care. That was, I remember we started off with a single, a single site, a single retail location, as our MVP, and we're trying to figure out, what is the lowest friction way that we can schedule somebody into one of these retail sites, which it sounds easy, very hard to do. And then also, how do we, create a kind of combined, very fluid, interaction between that allows us to load balance between, a physical presence and a digital presence. So to give you an example, within an express care clinic, an express care, somebody, the nurse practitioner sitting in the clinic could see somebody obviously at 10:20, through walk-in or scheduled online. At 10:40, they could see somebody from anywhere in the state through video visits, right? So we built this kind of seamless technology that allowed us to really utilize our clinical teams at the utmost. That paid dividends during COVID because, we were faced with a situation where we had 60 something, express care clinics. We had to shut them down almost immediately because of the lack of PPE at the beginning of the COVID crisis. And what happened is the platform automatically kind of flipped over to virtual, and those same 60 or 70 nurse practitioners were able to serve a whole host of both actually really sick people as well as people who were the worried well, who just wanted to make sure that they didn't have COVID. And this was before a lot of testing was available and those types of things. So it really demonstrated the power of kind of building this platform with flexibility and in close collaboration with our operations and our clinical teams.
Yeah, that's an amazing example. And another example I know of the team coming together in 2020 to serve, our community's needs was around the GRACE COVID assessment and triaging bot that the product development team built, which was a huge success. So yeah, I think there are a lot of those examples. With our last couple minutes here, could you tell us a little bit about some of the major goals in 2021? I know we've got a lot on our plate.
Right.
We're focusing on a whole bunch of different things, but maybe just provide one or two highlights.
Yeah, I think the first thing is in the same way that we supported the clinical teams to deal with COVID. We're also now kind of supporting them from a vaccine, information, showing patients where they can find the closest vaccination site. If it's a community vaccination, getting them into primary care if they're eligible to get vaccinated, providing them with content to educate them about the vaccines. And then also, Grace, our chatbot, has also been instrumental in kind of, engaging with them and answering questions in a scalable way around the vaccine. So that's one area. Second area is around engagement. Digital engagement is really important. So, we're deploying SSO across our entire health system. That's a technical term for the ability to engage patients and know who they are across the continuum of the digital experience. And then also, really, really emphasizing and deploying the Providence app at scale. And then, the third area is really starting to kind of think about, how to kind of scale and grow some of the technologies that we've already kind of been working on in a systematic way across the health system, and integrating this into kind of new business models. I can't think the kind of final stage of evolution for us has got to be around. It's not digital and this business model. It's integrated. You kind of come up with that as part of the building of new business models and the building of new offerings.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Aaron, for joining today, and to everyone for listening and sending your questions. To learn more about what DIG is up to, our initiatives, programs, services, you can join us at www.providence-dig.org. And if you're interested in learning more about Providence, around initiatives, programs, ways to give, or if you're looking for medical care, you can visit providence.org. And please make sure to follow us on social media at Providence Health System for LinkedIn and Facebook, and under Providence on Twitter. And thanks again, Aaron. Always great to do these with you, and hope everyone has a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks.